All right, good morning, everybody. This is Paul from VITA, and today we're going to be talking the Zirconia black hole effect, bringing fluorescence to the surface. All right, so what exactly is the black hole effect, and what are we talking about? Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. You guys, your phones will be on mute to avoid background noise, since we got quite a few people on today. And this is a hands-on, so if you have stuff in front of you, you're certainly welcome to follow along. This will be recorded, and we will post it to our VITA North America YouTube page, so you can refer back to it and follow along then if you would like to do that later. I do like participation and I love questions, so there is a little question box in the panel. So please type in your questions and I will answer them as best I can. And I'll leave a little time at the end for some more Q&A. For CE, if you guys need CE credits, you guys will get an email that will tell you how to take care of that, but we will do that for you. Yeah, again, it'll be recorded. It'll be on our YouTube page. And so the black hole effect, what are we talking about? So if you guys have ever worked with zirconia, you know some of the issues that are related to it. And one of the big ones that we're going to talk about today is the fluorescence, that zirconia has no natural fluorescence. And I don't go to the discotheque like I used to back in the day, but every so often you would see like this poor girl on the side there, you know, nice brilliance, fluorescence, and then one dead looking tooth. And that is something we want to try and avoid. In addition to that, you know, zirconia has that problem to begin with, that, you know, it is very dead looking. And it's because, you know, zirconia is very hard, it's very dense. And, you know, where do we get our color and our vibrancy and that kind of stuff is through light transmission. So, talk a little bit about, you know, zirconia itself and how it's made up. And there are actually two phases of zirconia. There's a tetragonal phase and a quadrigonal phase. And the tetragonal phase is what gives zirconia its strength. Okay, it's very hard, it's very strong. The quadrangle is where we get our translucency. I'm sure you guys have heard of cubic zirconia. So it's kind of that mix or the balance between the two, you know, that we kind of play with to achieve, you know, that strength and still get some translucency. And that's why most people, most companies offer, you know, several different types and several different options when it comes to strength and translucency, because it's kind of that inverse scale, that as we increase the translucency, we're decreasing the strength. So we kind of have to find our happy medium depending on what type of restoration we're doing. That typically zirconias are kind of grouped into two categories: substructures or frameworks, and then monolithic or in full contour. And so for ours, if you look at our T and our HT, both of those are considered substructures or framework zirconia. So it has very high strength, but you can see not very much translucency. All right. And then as we transition to our ST and our XT, which have much higher translucency, we go down in strength. So it kind of depends on what we're trying to do with this. But you can see that what this really comes down to is light transmission and color. So how do we affect color when it comes to zirconia? And again, it kind of depends on the type of restoration we're doing. That, you can get zirconia just white, and you can stain it to match. The example shown in the picture here would be dip staining. Typically, I only do that on substructures and frameworks. And the reason is because, unless I'm doing a bunch of them all at the same time, it's very difficult to get a very consistent or precise shade just dipping it. But, the idea with the substructure and framework is just to get it close, that it's just a framework. We're going to layer porcelain on top of it and match our shade, our final shade that way. Another technique is the brush technique. And I don't color a lot of my zirconia anymore, but when I do, this is the way that I prefer to do it. It usually gets me a lot closer, and I have a lot more control over how much I'm adding and how much I'm going to affect the actual color change. But the way that I prefer to do it, and which is actually the most practical, is to buy my zirconia pre-shaded, because that way I know I'm going to get a very exact shade, and then add some effects to it. Adding some of the blue or the gray to give us more of a translucent effect at the incisal edge, or a little chroma if I need to bring that up. And these are all internal stains that, when we talk about light transmission and color, that the more color we can get coming from the inside, the more natural it's going to look. Again, the problem we have with zirconia is that it is very dense, very dead, and so it's really difficult to get a lot of light transmission in there. But the light that does come through, if we can get some of that stain internally, it's going to give us a little bit more natural of a look. So these are some different techniques that we can do to add some of that color internally. And I've only got a couple of slides here. I'm going to switch over to my bench, and I'm going to demonstrate a lot of this and show you kind of how I finish a zirconia crown, or some different options. And you can kind of see here that, adding those effects, how it looks after it's been sintered. Those colors are in there to kind of help guide you. You can see they're a lot more subtle when they come out, but they do affect it enough that it's going to give it a little bit of that internal color that we're looking for, that we can finalize with some external color. Okay. So when we start talking about external, we're talking stain and glaze. And, I'm sure all of you are technicians and have done stain and glaze before, but you know that for the most part, stain and glaze is kind of a visual trick, if you will, that all of the color is simply at the surface. So we're not getting it from the inside, but we kind of, adjust it on the outside. So, I'm going to go through some of that too, and some of the techniques that I use, because it's, some of the different, this is probably beyond my skill level. This is a very good technician here, but it shows you how much you can affect the actual look and color of a crown, even with just surface staining. But to bring it back around to our black hole, our dead tooth looking, especially under fluorescence, we're going to finish it off with our floral glaze, which has a lot of fluorescence built into it to give us that natural tooth look. Okay, so what all does that look like? You switch over to my bench here, and let's talk about some internal staining. So again, typically I will do pre-shaded zirconia, again, because it's so much more accurate and so much easier than trying to stain it to a particular shade. But I do like to add the effects because I think it makes a really big difference. And so what I've got out here is some of our effect liquids. So the blue, the gray, there is a brown and an orange. I don't use the orange a whole lot. You can get the actual shade, so if you are staining a shade, you can get that. But I also have out here a little chroma A because, like I said, if the pre-shaded, it's much easier to modify a pre-shaded than it is to stain it from nothing. So, but this is kind of what it looks like in the way that I do this. So, the chroma, if I need a little more chroma, I can come down here. See that okay? Yeah. In the cervical area and add a little bit here. I can't see that very well, can we? And then I can overlap a little more like that. And that's going to give me a little bit of a transition. So if I need a little more chroma, especially down here at the cervical area, that'll give me more transition than just a simple line. And then on the incisal, let's see, like the picture shows, you can actually come, or the diagram that I showed earlier, can we see that? You can come along the cusp tips here and give a little bit. I also like to do a little bit like this to give it kind of a transition. A little bit on this cusp of curability there, just for fun. And with some of the gray too, I like to kind of use that to blend kind of in between the blue. And kind of the combination of the two really gives us some nice effect of translucency at the incisal. The other thing we can use here too is some of this brown, especially if you're looking for a little more of an aged look in here. We can come in here to the central fossas and add just a little bit of this brown. Some of those grooves, that here. Just like that. And just a tiny bit up through there. So it is kind of subtle when it comes out, but when it's all together with the external staining and everything else, it really kind of makes it pop. Instead, that what we're trying to get is some of that color coming from the inside. Now, let me see. Probably add a little bit more blue here and here. Now, if you guys have ever played with this, the zirconia in its raw state is very soft. It's almost like chalk. And so you have to be very careful with it. that you don't want to scratch or gouge it, especially when you're finishing it. But also when you're adding these stains and stuff, it's like chalk. It's like a sponge. It really soaks it up. So it disappears, or it looks like it, very fast. So it is easy to add too much. So I definitely recommend that you mill a couple of these and kind of practice with it until you kind of get an idea of how much it soaks up, how much it affects it, and kind of figure out exactly what you like. That adding multiple layers is going to make it darker and more noticeable. So going back and highlighting the areas you want a little extra effect on. Something like that. Or like I was talking about before with the chroma, that if you overlap, then you'll get more saturation on the bottom, less on the top, and so you'll get that kind of gradation effect. Where am I purchasing my staining brushes? Man, I'm working on it. That for these zirconia stains, you should always use a non-metal brush. These are ones that VITA used to make, and I think come with the kit, but I don't know that we sell them separately. But honestly, I'm working on sourcing some brushes, because you're right, that's what we need is some decent brushes. So check back with me, send me an email, and I will let you know as soon as I find some decent brushes. Does the drying time decrease for pre-shaded zirconia that has stain characterization? Depends on how much stain characterization you add. Definitely if you're dip staining it, it's going to be much more saturated and take a much longer time to dry. If you're doing something very simple like I am and brushing just some very subtle effects on there, then yeah, it's going to dry a little bit quicker. The difference in drying time, goodness, to be perfectly honest, I don't do enough production cases to know, because I usually, when I'm doing these, I will stain them and then I will either leave them overnight and fire them in the morning, or something like that, because I don't actually have a heat lamp here. So I will try and find that out for you. Send me an email and I'll try and get you a better answer, okay? Yeah, so that's kind of what it looks like. Let me see if maybe this A1 shows up a little better, and I can show you what it looks like to kind of, stain it on the body. Still not real well, huh? So essentially what it would look like is, now this is the brown, so it's a little dark, but I want you guys to kind of be able to see what we're trying to do here. And then on a second pass, overlap it a little more that way, and then maybe even one last time. So if you're trying to do a full color on a crown, you can do something like that. Yes, I have two people that are pointing out I am not wearing gloves. You're absolutely right. You should wear gloves. I have found that the camera does not pick them up real well, so that's why I am not wearing gloves. But you're absolutely right. You should be wearing gloves. So shame on me. So the other thing I wanted to say about these before we kind of move forward is that finishing these before it goes into the sintering furnace. Actually, the more you can smooth these out, the better. That I have a couple of tools I use. I have kind of a rough brush like this, which will knock off most of the burr lines. And then I've got a super soft rubber wheel that I usually go over it, and it'll smooth it out pretty well. Again, the smoother I can get it before it goes into the sintering oven, the easier it will be to work with when it comes out. So I am going to, let's see, if I have reduced the crown, the stain will be changed. So yeah, if you've stained it and you grind on it, yes, the internal stains, you're not, depending on how much you add, it does soak in. And so as you're grinding away, you are losing some of that pigment. You're less likely to grind through it than you would be on a surface stain, like a stain and glaze. So yes, it will affect it. Hopefully you're not grinding so much that it's going to be affect it very much. So give me a second here and let me pull out my other palette. And let's talk a little bit about post-sintering. So again, you can do it just white. This would be just a white unstained, and you can do, it's pretty tough to characterize a total white crown like this and add enough chroma to really make it look nice. But this is one of the examples I had from some of the samples that I was making. More naturally though, we're gonna go with, a pre-shaded option that we're gonna stain and glaze. And as you guys can see, hopefully here, the transition here between the darker and then that lighter at the incisal, okay? And that is from, well, this was a pre-shaded one, but we added some of that blue on the incisal to give it some of that effect, and a little bit extra chroma down here to give it that effect. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and finish dialing in exactly the way we want it with our stain and glaze. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is post-sintering, and I get this question a lot, is people will pull it out of the furnace and they'll hold it next to their shade tab and they'll say, oh, it's too light, it doesn't match my shade tab. And so the thing that I have to remind them is that, again, we've got our color comes from our light transmission, so the light going in and light coming out. And without any kind of a substructure or a core, we've got all this light coming from the inside. So right out of the furnace, your zirconia crown is probably going to look too light compared to your shade tab. That what you need to do is add a core to it, and then it will match your shade tab perfectly, because that's going to be representative of what it's going to be like in the mouth. And again, with that light transmission, it's going to be hitting some dentin. It's going to hit a core before it comes back out. We're not going to get that extra light coming in from underneath. So that is just a reminder, because I get a lot of calls about that. So if you have ever been wondering about your shade of your crowns coming out of the sintering furnace, that's probably why. Okay, so finishing zirconia. So zirconia, even after we've sintered it, okay? The surface finish of zirconia is actually still very, very hard and very, very abrasive. So we want to make sure that we don't have raw zirconia against natural dentition. I got a question. What material are you using to create the core substructure? Oh, sorry. This is our VMLC. It's just light cure composite. Our VMLC comes in, comes in the VITA 2 shades. So, if this is an A1, I'm going to do an A1 core or an A2 core or whatever core represents the stump shade. And that way I know that I can, what it's going to look like when it's in the mouth. Sorry, yeah, our VMLC, our light cure composite. That's what I made that core out of. Sorry, what was I saying? Yeah, so the surface is very abrasive, that we never want to use raw zirconia against natural dentition. It is like sandpaper and it will absolutely destroy the opposing tooth. The absolute best way to finish zirconia is to very high shinely polish it. That is the best finish surface against natural dentition. Secondarily would be to stain and glaze. A glaze laser is nice and smooth, so it will not wear the opposing dentition, but you have to remember that all stain and glazes do wear after time, and so you want to be careful of that. I've done a couple of different ways, even a combination of polishing the occlusal surface and then just stain and glazing the surface, or even stain and glazing over that polish. So there's a couple of ways to do it. There's a few different techniques, but either way, you want to make sure that the surface either has a stain or a glazed surface or a polished surface. It's very important. So staining a crown, with our stain kit here, and you can see this is our Accent Plus stain kit, and we've got lots of different effect colors here. I don't usually use most of them, but or a lot of them. I've got a few that I really like, and I only use the ones that I need to. So we're going to start by adding a little bit of the powder fluid. This is just the modeling liquid here, and just wetting it. And this is kind of your standard stain and glaze here. That, there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can add our glaze. And simply go like that straight into the furnace. Once we've got our glaze on there, if we need to add a little chroma, we can. So that is your standard way to stain and glaze. Now, if we're going to try and use this floor glaze, we want to spray it on at the end. So there's a couple of ways that we can do this. We can do the two-stage method of adding some of the chroma or effect directly to the crown, and then doing a stain fixation bake. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be to, we can always, mix a little bit of this with our glaze. And do that in a single firing. But again, if we're going to use the fluoro glaze, it comes in a spray. So what a lot of the clinicians I know do that are trying to do these, in the practice chair side and trying to save time, they don't want to do the two-step firing of a stain fixation and then a glaze. And so what you can do, and this may take a little bit of practice to make sure that you get it just right, but is to add a little bit of, if you're going to add a little chroma or whatever, and then just hold it under the muffle just enough to dry it out. And then, if you're very delicate, you can add the spray glaze. Just be careful, let it cool down before you add the spray glaze because it's very cold. And when you're doing the spray glaze, and you don't want that on a hot crown. So, if you're drying it or heating it up to dry it out, just make sure that you cool it off before you add the glaze. So when you're doing the glaze, you want to hold it, 6 to 8 inches away, and you want to kind of be moving. I use a sweeping motion. That you don't want to hold it in one spot. You don't want it to pool. You also want to make sure that you get enough on there. You don't want it to go on dry because then it'll end up looking kind of orange peely. So we want to make sure we get it on there well, but we don't want it to pool or run or drip or anything. So once you get it on there and it dries, you guys can see that as it's drying, it starts to look very chalky on the outside. That way we can tell it's got a nice coverage. Let me see if I can wipe some of that off so you can tell the difference. There we go. If you can see kind of the natural over here versus the very kind of chalky on this side. You can see a little bit of it here actually on the tongs. So that's what it should look like on the outside. And this is the Accent Plus Fluoro Glaze LT spray, and that's going to give us that fluorescence. All right. That natural, and what does that look like? I'll show you this. So this is a demo piece that I have made, and this is a black light. Let's see how well this shows up under the camera. This is an unfinished zirconia, and you can see that there is not a lot of fluorescence. Now this is one that has been treated with the fluoro glaze, and hopefully that shows up on the camera how it really pops. You can really see that fluorescence. Makes a big difference. So that way, we can create some natural looking teeth with our internal staining. We can get the colors as close as we can with the external staining. We can dial it in precisely, give it that nice finish, and then with our fluoro glaze, we make sure and give it that nice fluorescence so it looks as natural as we can get it to look. Of course, this is zirconia, so there's only so lifelike we can make it. It's never going to look as good as feldspathic or even lithium disilicate, simply because it is so dense. So we can add some of these, and essentially we're doing some of the same techniques in the external stain as we did with the internal. A little bit of blue on the incisal, to give the illusion of translucency. And we can always do a little bit of brown here. Go. And again, I would dry that. Use my floral glaze and put it in the furnace. And that is how you're going to get zirconia to look as good as you possibly can make zirconia look. So let me see, questions here. Does adding the floral glaze cause a color shift in daylight? Not that I've ever noticed or heard of. You said anecdotally you've heard others talk about it. I haven't ever really heard that. If you see something like that and you can document it, please send it to me. I'd love to see it. But I've never noticed that to be any kind of an issue. So, other questions? Please feel free to add questions in there. Type them in. Let me know what you guys are thinking. If you guys have questions about any of the products that I showed today, you know, I showed some of our YZ effect liquids, our chroma liquids. I showed our Accent Plus stains, our floral glaze stains. You can talk to your sales reps and they can give you some more information about that. That if you have questions that I didn't answer or that you think of later, please give either myself or my colleague Jim a call or send us an email that we will be happy to talk to you or answer any of your questions. And of course, we've got some more, lots more VITA learning webinars coming up. We've got some with Peter Pizzi and Dr. Queck, Dr. Julian Canejo. Jim is going to give some more. So we got lots of stuff coming up. It's pretty exciting. Check out our website that'll have a list of everything. And of course, check us out on our socials. We're always posting stuff. And then of course, our YouTube page where we have a lot more videos of webinars like this on several different topics. This one I'm sure will go up there as well, so you can refer back to those. Questions before I go? I see a couple here. I'm going to leave this up here, so if you guys need to get a hold of me. What milling machine am I using? As far as milling zirconia, I really don't have any kind of a preference. I've used dozens of different machines. The one I happen to have in the lab at the moment is the Amann Gerbach machine. But yeah, I've used most of the major ones out there and they all work very well. Does the shading liquid work with all of the ZR VITA projects? So the effect liquids, so the effect ones I showed, the blue, the gray, the brown, and the chroma, those are universal for all of our YZ, and actually you can use them on any zirconia because they are exactly that. They're just effect liquids. So there's no, you know, you can use them universally. Now our shade liquids, that is going to be different depending on the zirconia. And the reason is because we talked about at the beginning the makeup of the zirconia, how there is, by changing the percentage of ingredients, it becomes slightly less dense and more translucent. And because that density changes just slightly, it affects how those stains absorb. And so when you're going from like a T to an HT or an ST, there is actually a shade liquid specific to each of those types. Because we're trying the shade liquid to match an exact shade in A1. And so they're not universal, they're individual to the specific product. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. If you want more clarity, call me or email me. I can send you some literature or show you a couple of diagrams that explain it better. The opacity choice of zirconia when doing Pontics. When I choose a more translucent zirconia, it sometimes causes it to be dark in the mouth. Yeah, that's really tough. And you're right, that's exactly the problem, you know, we're talking about with the light transmission. And in a Pontic, well, when we have zirconia over a tooth, the zirconia is only so thick. And then even though the tooth root is dark, it transmits light differently or better than it does through the zirconia. Whereas a Pontic doesn't have that tooth core, it just has that dense zirconia all the way through. So it ends up looking more, dark in the mouth. So how to get around that? That's a little tricky. You can use some of those effect liquids to kind of lighten it up, like some of that blue along that Pontic will lighten it slightly, give it a little more translucency. The other way to do it would probably be to actually hand stain it. So that would be one of the examples if I was trying really hard to avoid a dark Pontic, especially if it was in the, I don't know, I would probably never put zirconia monolithic in the front of the mouth. But if you do, that would be a good one to actually stain it by hand, because that way you could stain that Pontic less, and so it would look less dark in the mouth. So those would be my suggestions. But if you want to talk about it in more detail, call me and we can chit chat. Which VITA zirconia has the fastest sintering time, and how long is it? Oh man, now you're asking the tough questions. Off the top of my head, I don't remember. Send me an email and I will get you that data. Water or liquid base stain for zirconia you preferred? The stain liquid, or this effect liquid that I was using, that I was showing earlier, is actually a water-based liquid. So I don't know. Is that what you were asking? Hopefully, it's a water-based liquid. It's not an acidic-based one, so it's a little bit nicer, and it works pretty well. If that wasn't your question, let me know or call me and we can talk about it. Great questions, guys. What else you guys got? We've got a few more minutes. If you guys have some more questions, I'll be happy to stay on and answer them. If not, then thank you so much for joining me today. And like I said, we've got more stuff coming up. Please join us. If you have other questions, please call or shoot us an email. And yeah, thank you. Looks like that's kind of the end of the questions here. So I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you all for attending. Have a great day.